Today we'll start by providing some background on the tool before exploring the features and demoing the site by exploring a couple of potential use cases. We'll wrap up by providing a brief overview of our e-reporter program, so if you're a funder who's looking to submit data for inclusion in the tool, you have some instruction on how to do that. And we'll finish with a question and answer session. At any point, if you'd like to start exploring the tool on your own, please feel free. The URL, democracy.foundationcenter.org, will be posted on every slide. So with that, I'll turn things over to Anna to provide background on the project.
Great. Thanks, Supriya. Can you hear me, Supriya?
We can hear you.
Great. So I'll start with some background on Foundation Center. We've been around for 60 years as a nonprofit whose mission is to strengthen the social sector by advancing knowledge about philanthropy in the US and around the world. And one of our main tools in service of this mission is data. Our database houses information on more than 130,000 foundations and 5 million grants from US and increasingly internationally based funders. And in recent years, we've partnered with various organizations to make our data and information accessible through data visualization tools and issue-focused web portals. So in the case of this tool, Foundation Funding for U.S. Democracy, we've worked with 8 funders, pictured here. And as active democracy funders, they were really interested in developing a better understanding of how much funding is already going to particular issue areas related to democracy and sort of making this information easily accessible as a public good in a dynamic and regularly updated format. So the tool was originally launched in 2014. And we at Foundation Center have maintained it and continued to add data since then. And we see the data sort of as a reference tool for conversations happening in the democracy space with the potential to inform the strategic direction of organizations already working in these areas, as well as being useful to those who sort of, in the context of recent events, especially may be interested in joining the field. And the use cases that Larry will be sharing later really sort of highlight the potential here. But for now, I'll just provide a quick overview of some of the filters and features in the tool. So I'm going to be switching over to the tool itself at democracy.foundationcenter.org. So feel free to follow along. And this is the landing page where we'll click on Explore the Data to really dive into the mapping tool. Now, X out of the welcome screen. And so this is the Foundation Funding for U.S. Democracy tool. It opens up to a dashboard summarizing all the grants that we have here, meeting this democracy criteria, and indicating that as of this week, the tool contains almost 39,000 grants, totaling $3.7 billion. So the data in the tool is updated regularly as we receive and process grants, and it includes grants going back to 2011. Up to the present. The data in the tool is generally sourced through one of 2 ways. Some funders regularly submit data directly to Foundation Center via our electronic reporting program, which I'll speak about again more towards the end of the webinar. And then for those funders who are not e-reporters, for the most part, we're sourcing their data via 990 tax forms or other publicly available sources. So this is the default view in the tool, the charts view. And I'll scroll down. It shows the breakdown of funding by the custom categories that we've created to represent different funding areas within the democracy space. So this taxonomy, which is sort of like a filing system we're using to categorize the grants by subject area, was created by the project with input from funders and other stakeholders who work on these issues. And it's undergone some edits since the tool was launched in 2014. But in the current form, there are 4 major categories: campaigns, elections, and voting, civic participation, government, and media, each with varying numbers of more specific subcategories, such as journalism, which appears under media here. And then we've also included a category for other, which captures funding that is more broadly aimed at strengthening U.S. democracy, but may not be specific enough to assign to any of the previous categories. So, for example, I think we have some grants in here where the grant description simply says, for U.S. democracy. So certainly speaking to the relevance for inclusion in the tool, but not sort of specifying which of these more detailed goals it belongs under. And with the exception of these other grants, grants can be assigned to as many categories as are applicable based on information provided as part of the grants record. And you can find definitions for each of these categories by clicking the category name here, which brings up this definitions page. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of the features of the tool and some different ways to view the data beyond this charts view before I pass things on to Larry to take you through some use cases where he'll be exploring these features in more detail. So starting from the upper left, the drop-down menu here allows you to identify whether you're interested in looking at funders or recipients, and it works well in coordination with this location field, which allows you to isolate a specific geography where funders or recipients are located. So here I'll type in Wisconsin, where I'm based, actually. And now we're limiting the grants to recipients-based grants awarded to recipients based in Wisconsin, meeting the democracy criteria for this tool. And you'll see Wisconsin showing up as a breadcrumb under the selections section, so I can easily X out of it if I want to clear specific search parameters. Next is the subject filter, and this is another way to search grants by customized democracy subject categories that we saw in this default charts view. If you know the subject that you're looking for, like campaign finance, you can type it in and it'll sort of auto-populate. Otherwise, you can see the full menu of options under Browse All Subjects. Additional filters exist under this More Filters tab, which opens up, allowing you to filter grants by population group, strategy, so that could be, using advocacy or public policy to advance the goal of a particular grant, or grants simply awarded for general support. We also do filtering by the amount of the grant year, funder type, so that could be community foundation, independent foundation, etc. And then geographic focus, which looks at whether the grant is focused at the local, state, or national level. And we're able to provide this where the detail in the grant offers that information. So for about half the grants, we're able to extract this information. And then really powerful section of this tool is the ability to search for a specific organization. And that should also come up with a list of options, and then filter by keywords. So say voter ID. You could search for grants that include that in the grant description. So once you've narrowed down your search parameters via the filters, so I'm currently limited to grants to recipients in Wisconsin, then you can select different views on the data, which are listed here vertically. So the charts view is the default view, as I showed you, and then the next view is through this maps view. And since I've isolated grants to those in Wisconsin, you'll see the focus is on this state, and it illustrates sort of the different clusters of recipients located throughout. So you can sort of click on these and bring up that sort of summary box listing how many grants meet those criteria. So finally, I'll select the lists view. And this is one entry point for the grants level detail for your search. So based on the filters you select, you can view the list of the funders meeting that criteria. So these are the funders awarding grants to recipients based in Wisconsin. And they're sorted by descending amount, with the largest funder at the top. You can move to the Recipients tab, which shows the same sort of list, but the unit of analysis is the recipient. These are the recipients based in Wisconsin. And then finally, the Grants tab lists the grants that are the source of the figures sort of aggregated throughout all of these different views. So this is sort of really where it gets especially exciting, I think. By clicking on the details icon, you can bring up that very detailed grants level information. So here we see that this is a $1.1 million grant awarded to the Bradley Impact Fund from the Chicago Community Trust in 2014, and it was made for general operating support. So not the most detailed grant in the tool, but you get the idea. Finally, at any time, if you want a PDF or CSV export of what you're seeing, you can click on these buttons on the right, and that will create it for you. So typically, across our tools that Foundation Center produces, the CSV exports are limited to 10 records, but for the Democracy tool, we allow 100 records in a single export. So that's sort of exciting. And you can pull that up and see the data that's included there. So I'll X out of here. I'm going to skip over these last views for now. So the advanced search is just sort of the filters aggregated in one section. And then Larry will be covering the constellations view more thoroughly in his discussion of some of the more specific uses of the tool. So I'll leave the glory to him on that one. It's a pretty exciting feature. And with that, I'll pass things over to him. Larry?
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. There's obviously a lot of ways to dig into this information, and we thought we would give you a couple of examples to show you what a funder might do to understand a little bit more about the space in which they're interested in doing some funding. And we also thought we'd take a look at a grant recipient or a grant seeker and what they might do to understand a little bit better what the field looks like and who else that is similar to them and what they do might be receiving funds in order to better figure out sources of funding for themselves. So let's start by assuming that we're a funder, and let's assume also that we have decided that one of the approaches that we want to take in getting into this space is that of focusing on litigation in terms of democracy-related work. There's a number of different ways that people can focus on different strategies for grant making, and they include, as Anna pointed out earlier, advocacy, coalition building, and so forth. But here's litigation and jurisprudence. So I'm going to select that, and we'll take a look, first of all, to see what kinds of work is happening in this space. Thanks for bearing with us while we get back to the democracy screen. So as you see here, we've got four main areas: campaigns, elections and voting, civic participation, government, and media. And immediately what pops out to you is that of these 1,800 grants that are focused on litigation as a strategy, the vast majority of them are being focused on civil liberties and the rule of law. If you click on this, you begin to see who is actually active in doing this kind of work. And first of all, you can see how the grants are arrayed here by size and the largest grant makers in the space and who the recipients of those grants are. We know that the Knight Foundation is typically a funder of media, and so one question that might immediately come up is, what could they possibly be doing in the litigation space as it relates to their work typically in media. So you could click for more information on this particular $25 million grant that went to Columbia University, and you'll see that it went to the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia, which is focused on preserving broad First Amendment rights as a champion of domestic free expression through litigation. And one of the goals is to produce significant legal victories relative to First Amendment issues. So you can see that this is a grant that is related both to Knight's work in media as well as employing the strategy of litigation in this particular instance. Now, if you look at the top funders in this space who focus on doing work with respect to civil rights and litigation in particular as their strategy, you notice the Knight Foundation, as I just pointed out. You also see the Ford Foundation, but then you see, for example, the Robert W. Wilson Foundation, Charitable Trust, rather. And this is a foundation that you may not know that much about, so you might want to find out a little bit more about the kinds of work that the Robert W. Wilson Charitable Trust is doing. And here you can see that it has given 4 grants over a period of 4 years to the Institute for Justice. Now, if we want to find out a little bit more about the Institute for Justice, we can see that here's a grant description for one of the grants that was awarded by the Robert W. Wilson Charitable Trust. And if you go back to, let's see, where's the link here? All right. I need to X out of a couple things here. Let's go to the recipients. We need to X out back to get to the recipients here. And then we're going to find out about the Institute for Justice. And what we learned here is that the Institute for Justice was the recipient of 475 grants over the period of time that the grants data has been collected in this tool. So let's find out a little bit more about the Institute for Justice by clicking on that link. And here you have a profile of the work that they do, and you can see that strategic litigation is one of the main activities that they're engaged in. And if you clicked on their website link, you could find out more information about the organization, and you see that they work on issues like economic liberty, school choice, private property rights, and again, that litigation is one of their main strategies. So if you click on the Grants tab here, you get a list of all of the grants that have been received by the Institute for Justice. You'll see the grants from the Robert W. Wilson Charitable Trust, as well as grants made by other foundations. And again, this is all focused on, specifically, civil liberties and the rule of law, and the strategy being used is litigation and jurisprudence. So this organization could have received more grants than this in total, but this is what it looks like when you use those 2 particular filters. Now, while we're still focused on civil liberties and the rule of law and the strategy of legislation and jurisprudence, let's take a look here to see what the field looks like when you take a network approach. We're going to go back here and make sure that we still have civil liberties and the rule of law as a filter. And what we'll see here is that all right, let's get it down where we can see it. make sure that we get back to the filters we were using. Here you see the Institute for Justice, and you can see that there are many funders, which are these orange dots, funding the Institute for Justice, but they appear to be funding primarily the Institute for Justice and not a whole lot of other organizations. On the other hand, you have the Foundation to Promote Open Society, which is funding lots of different organizations that are working in the space of civil liberties and rule of law and focused on litigation and jurisprudence as a strategy. So this gives you an example of how the field is structured in terms of the funders and their relationships to different recipient organizations. Now, what we can do next is take a look at this from the perspective of a grant seeker. Let's assume, for example, I'm going to clear all of the selections that we've made here. And we'll go back up here to the map. Let's assume that we're a nonprofit organization working in California with children and youth, and you've decided that given the current political context, it might be a good idea to reorient your programming to more actively engage youth on issues related to democracy. So what you might want to do is you might want to see what other organizations in California are actually working with or on behalf of this population in a way that strengthens democracy. So first of all, let's see if we can find other organizations based in California. There you go, and we're focusing here on recipients, and we'll see that there are 990 recipients in the state of California that are focusing on democracy issues and looking at the engagement of youth and children on democracy. And then if you're looking further, let's see, we'll go over here and we'll select population, children and youth. And here, once we filtered for children and youth, you see that the number of funders has gone down to 301. Let's say our organization is located in Los Angeles. We can click on Los Angeles, and we'll get a summary of the grant making that's focused on democracy and oriented towards children and youth in Los Angeles County. And then this gives us an opportunity to click on either funders, recipients, or grants. And if we click on recipients, we'll see that there are recipients such as the National Immigration Law Center, the University of Southern California, and the Constitutional Rights Foundation that are receiving grants in support of children and youth and focused on democracy. You might be curious about the Constitutional Rights Foundation, which received over 34 grants, and you could click on details. And you could see that there's a list of grants here, and if you wanted to find out more about the organization, you could click on this link, and that would give you information about Constitutional Rights Foundation, including the web address for you to find out more information about them. Now, let's suppose that it would be helpful for you to have a list of all of these recipients in the Los Angeles area so that you understand what the range of organizations is that are working in this space focused on youth and children in the Los Angeles area, so you can place yourself in relation to that group of organizations. So you can actually download the list of organizations, and here you'll see the Excel spreadsheet that allows you to have the details on those organizations, the amount of money that they've received, and the number of grants that they've received. So that's a quick tour, taking a look at things from the standpoint of a funder who's interested in focusing on litigation issues, and also taking a look at a recipient organization or a grant-seeking organization that may be interested in funding in the area of youth and children in a specific geographical area, namely Los Angeles. That can be obviously generalized to other geographies and to other support strategies and other population groups, but those are two ways that this tool might be useful for either funders or grant seekers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anna, who will provide a quick introduction to our electronic reporting program for those who are looking to add their own grants data to this tool.
Great, thanks, Larry. So I'll wait until we're, oh, there we are. So this plug is largely directed to the grant makers in the audience, so I'll be brief. But we wanted to provide an overview of our electronic reporting program, which is really the best way to ensure that your most recent data is included in the tool and that the story of your foundation's giving is being told accurately. So if you're not currently submitting data to us directly as an e-reporter, consider doing so. It's as simple as downloading an Excel spreadsheet of your full grants list from your grants management software and emailing it to us at egrants@foundationcenter.org. So that email address also appears on the slides. And when you do so, we request that you submit your full grants list. We also provide the option to sort of flag those grants that you'd like to see in the democracy tool, but there's no need to sort of isolate those grants in your submission. And as an e-reporter, there are some perks. You'll also receive a complimentary interactive map that uses the platform that Foundation Funding for U.S. Democracy works off. So it's a map with all of your foundation's grant making for the fiscal years submitted through the e-reporting program. So it's a link to an interactive map. A lot of our e-reporters sort of embed it on their own websites, or it can sort of be an internal tool, sort of another way to visualize the grants that you're awarding. And as a handout, I've included a handout to this webinar. I've included our template that lists out the data fields that we ask funders to submit for their grants, alongside those that are optional. So from our perspective, more information is always better, but there are some fields that we really sort of need to create a grants record versus those that are more optional. And for more information about the program, I've also included the site URL on the slide, which appears on our website, foundationcenter.org. So I also wanted to mention a blog post that Larry wrote recently that provides some high-level findings from the data in the democracy tool. So typically our work around Foundation Funding for U.S. Democracy has focused on updating the data and honing the search strategies that we're using to assign grants to each category. But this blog post on Fill-In Topic, the blog for Philanthropy News Digest, which is a service of Foundation Center, provides some high-level analysis of the data. So what are we seeing in terms of the different strategies or geographies that are being supported or receiving less support, as the case may be, in the democracy space. So as I said, the post appears on Fill-In Topic at the URL listed on the slide, and I encourage you to give it a read and sort of offer any reactions you have to the post or any other observations through your use of the tool in the comment section there. And then finally, one last relevant resource produced by Foundation Center, Glass Pockets, our initiative that champions philanthropic transparency among funders, has produced a really great resource, Eye on the Trump Administration. that tracks the charitable giving related to the members of the new administration, along with their nonprofit board service. So if we move to the next slide, this is sort of a screenshot from that resource, and it's a great nonpartisan tool to really just explore a basic question: how philanthropic is the Trump administration? So I've included the URL in the bottom left of the slide here, and it's also featured prominently on glasspockets.org. So now I'll turn things back to Supriya, who's been looking at the questions that have been coming in for the Q&A portion of the webinar.
Yes, we have some questions coming in. One question is whether or not there's a category that includes prevention of hate. That's a question coming in from Deva Hirsch, who says that they've made grants to Facing History and ADL for school-based education programs that increase understanding and help prevent hate. And so they believe that it should fit under the democracy umbrella. So they're curious if it is included in there.
That's a great question. We don't specifically have a category titled Prevention of Hate. I think a lot of that grant making is falling under our civil liberties category. And one sort of, I guess, initial response to that question, or sort of like line of inquiry to go down, is to search for that organization, Facing History, and see using one of the filters and see sort of how that grant making is falling out within the tool currently. I believe that organization is on my radar, so I believe we do have some grant making to that recipient in the tool, and I'm also happy to sort of have a further conversation online. My email is included on this last slide if there is grant making of yours that we have or don't have, and you'd like to submit, and you'd like to ensure that it is included in the democracy tool. I'm very happy to have that conversation.
Great. And another question we have is from Jessica about what other topics Foundation Center has to offer aside from democracy.
That's another great question, and I might pass that one off to Larry to give sort of a global overview of some of our other landscape projects.
Thanks, Anna. We have, first of all, we should mention that we're not limited to simply looking at specific topics like U.S. democracy. We have a taxonomy that includes subject areas for, subject categories for more than 17 major categories, and I think if you look at all of the subcategories under those, it amounts to more than 600 subject categories in total. So there are lots of ways to filter the information that we have and zero in on lots of general topics in which philanthropy is doing its work. But we have built other portals that provide this level of detailed information on specific topics of work that are being done by foundations in the United States and elsewhere. You may recall when we introduced Anna at the beginning of this webinar, we mentioned some work that's been done with the Peace and Securities Funders Group, and also some work that's being done with the International Human Rights Funders Group. There are portals that we have developed for both of those associations of foundations that focus on work that they're doing in the area of peace and security on the one hand, and in the area of human rights on the other. And both of those specific topics involved the detailed taxonomic work that we did in the U.S. democracy project, which led to the construction of the different major categories that you've seen demonstrated on the democracy portal, the 4 major areas in which funders in this area tend to be working. So we have worked, generally speaking, with groups of foundations who are focused on specific areas like that, and have created specific taxonomies that allow them to talk in greater detail and with much more specificity that is relevant to the kind of work that they're doing. A couple of other portals that I might mention, we've done work with some funders who are interested in funding men and boys of color. We have a portal that was developed called BMA Funders. That's BMA for Black Male Achievement Funders. And we also have done work with funders who are working in the area of water access, sanitation, and hygiene. And we came out with a portal not too long ago that focused on funding the ocean, which is linked also to some of the work that we're doing on the Sustainable Development Goals framework, which was adopted by the UN a couple of years ago, consisting of 17 categories of goals that all the UN countries have agreed to work towards meeting, at least goals that are relevant in their countries. For each of these 17 areas of work, including poverty alleviation, improving the environment, community development, and other aspects of the framework that are being adopted by these countries. And you can see an example of that in our sdgfunders.org website. So we have gone into a number of different areas and created special taxonomies so that funders who are interested in any of these types of work have an opportunity to dig in pretty deeply into those topics.
And I'll just note that I'm sort of doing a rapid fire pasting of the links to the sites that Larry has mentioned in the chat function. So there should be links available there for the sites that he's mentioned.
Great. We do have another question about the taxonomy, Anna, if you can talk a little bit about that and whether it's been finalized or...
That is a great question. So sort of work on the taxonomy is never fully complete, although it has gone through at least one major revision since the project was developed. And so we're closer to a sort of more final version of that taxonomy. But originally we had about 55 categories, so it got very detailed, and we found that from a user perspective it became very difficult to navigate. A lot of the language that was used would be maybe specific to like one prominent funder's programming and framing of that topic, and then just wasn't very resonant sort of from a field-wide perspective. So we have tried the direction we've tried to go is towards greater simplicity. That being said, I am currently working with PACE, the affinity group for philanthropy for active civic engagement, so civic engagement funders, to sort of rethink how we might represent funding in the civic engagement space in the field, so it's sort of more resonant, I guess, with how they think about their funding. And then we're also thinking about, so public policy appears as a strategy within the taxonomy, but there's just a lot of public policy grant making that doesn't necessarily, so arguably all public policy grant making has implications for democracy. So I guess that's more of a sort of the scope of the data in the tool, but we are sort of currently having that conversation too. Should we broaden the scope as to what is defined as democracy as far as the tool is concerned? So again, I would definitely invite you to reach out to me directly. aak@foundationcenter.org is my email address with any sort of questions you have about the taxonomy or strong suggestions or interests in sort of you know, how we might rethink it in the future, or even, I mean, I think initiating a conversation that way, there may be, it may be the case that the tool is already actually fairly well suited to isolating the grant making that you're looking for through various filters and other searches. So yeah, but happy to have that conversation directly.
Great, Anna. And we have one more question about how you assign grants to the different categories in the tool.
Yeah, so another great question, and something I sort of glossed over in the overview. So I would say it's heavily dependent on the grant descriptions that we receive, which on the whole tend to be better through our e-reporting program than they are when sourced from 990s. So on the basis of the information provided by the grant description and some additional information that may be provided by a funder, such as the program area of the grant, or information that we even know about a recipient and sort of the area of work that they focus on. We assign grants or we assign codes to the grants, all grants that we process at Foundation Center through the philanthropy classification system. So this is the broader taxonomy that Larry referenced, where we have sort of hundreds of subject codes that we assign to grants. And then something sort of more specific like democracy, where we're going into greater detail than that sort of broader taxonomy really offers. We're using a combination of our codes, the PCS philanthropy classification system codes, in combination with keywords that we're finding in the grant description or the recipient name that really sort of tip us off to the suggestion that it's really relevant to a particular category that the grant making activity is likely to be. So that's also something we're refining continuously, sort of on the margins, those search strategies. And we actually review the grants before they are uploaded to the tool. So there's that sort of automated level of these search strategies that we've created that we're honing that initially assign a grant to a category, but then there's a level of manual review that's happening after that to sort of reassign grant making. For example, it's really difficult to like certain areas of civic engagement. I think our code and our coding and our current search strategies, we haven't found a sort of a fail-proof method to sort of automatically assign those to civic engagement categories. So that's what that level of manual review really helps with.
Thanks, Anna. And we have one other question asking if we look at Foundation websites in addition to the 990s and the e-reporting program, since many of them list their grants on their websites.
I'll let Larry take this one.
Yes, the answer is that we do look at websites in addition to looking at 990s and the information that's provided through our e-reporting program. Generally speaking, we prioritize collecting information through our e-reporting program since it's using a format to collect the data that relates directly to the different ways that we use the data in the tools that we develop. So it tends to be more accurate, more comprehensive, and timelier than the data that we can typically get from 990s. But we do work specifically with some foundations where we pull in information directly from their websites, and we display that information in another tool that we've developed, which provides real-time data on the grant making of some of the largest foundations in the country. It's called the reporting commitment, and that's a direct feed from information that is posted on websites of large foundations in the country and can be accessed, I believe, through Glass Pockets, if I'm remembering correctly. Which is our transparency website and allows people to see how foundations are communicating about their work through their websites and other mechanisms such as social media in order to improve public awareness of the work that they're doing. And that includes making their grant making available in close to real time through a feed that we pick up directly from their websites and post onto the reporting commitment site on Glass Pockets. We also work directly with many foundations who will tell us what their preference is in terms of where we get the data that we use for all of our databases. And if a foundation prefers that we take information as it is presented on their website, then that overrides any other criteria that we might use to collect their information and put it into our products and services.
Great. So we're close to time, so I'm just going to take one more question, and that is, what's the lag time between pulling information and it appearing on foundation funding for U.S. democracy?
That's another great question. And it sort of varies a bit. Larry, I'm wondering if you might have better insights to this. But first off, I can speak from the perspective of this specific project. So once a grant has been processed, it may be sort of a month or two before it shows up. It shows up in the tool. But in terms of processing turnaround time, Larry, I think you can provide a more comprehensive answer on that.
Well, we do update all of our databases on a weekly basis. So whatever new grants information has been loaded into our databases during the previous week, we will then be added into any of the tools that we developed, and the counts of grants and the amounts of grants will be increased by whatever it is that we have completed processing on in that previous week. And from week to week it varies what sorts of things get processed by the data team here at Foundation Center. We have a continuous loading of grants information from 990s on a daily basis, and that is usually governed by what we receive from the IRS and how that comes in and when certain foundations actually arrive. If we get information from electronic reporters, that goes to the front of the line and we try to process that more quickly. The thing that determines more than anything else how quickly something actually appears in a tool like Democracy Funders is how clean the data are when they come to us. In some cases, we have to do additional research in order to make sound determinations as to what categories need to be applied when we index and code these grants. And that will slow down the process somewhat. And in the case of a foundation which is making grants to organizations that have not previously been entered into our database, we always do additional research on those organizations, those recipient organizations, so that we can collect additional information about those organizations and add it to the descriptive materials that we provide through these kinds of tools. So that when you go to look up, for example, on Democracy Funders what a particular recipient does, that information has been collected through a separate process that is added on to the grants processing that we do. That's why you're able to actually see all of the information about each of the recipients on Democracy Funders. So we do try to prioritize, as I said, the e-reported data, and that typically makes it through more quickly.
And I'll just add to that the sort of lag time related to when it is uploaded to the Democracy tool itself is largely due to that layer of manual review that we're doing.
All right. Well, thank you, Anna and Larry, for taking us through the tool, and thank you, everyone else, for being part of this webinar. as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is recorded and you will be receiving a recording via email. And of course, another reminder to please visit the democracy.foundationcenter.org tool so that you can access and play around with it and see who's funding what in regard to democracy. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to Anna directly. Her email address is up there on the screen, which is aak@foundationcenter.org. Thank you very much.
Thanks.